Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you today, this evening on Sunday. My name is Pınar Dinç. I'm a political scientist at Lund University, Center for Advanced Middle Eastern Studies, and I'm happy to chair this panel today. And I'd like to start by condemning the assassination of Nagihan Akarsel, Jinology Academy member and also Jinology Journal editorial board member, who was assassinated in Süleymaniye a couple of days ago. And I know that Meral was a colleague of her. So my condolences to Meral and all of her colleagues and friends and comrades. And I would also like to express solidarity with the protest wave in Iran, with all the women, all the people, all Kurds and everyone who are out there and protesting following the Jiyan Mahsa Amini's brutal death. Today's panel will be about ecological racism and and environmental justice movements and the role of women and ecofeminism. And we have two speakers, Meral Çiçek and Sonia Karimi, who will present for 20 minutes each, 15 to 20 minutes. And then we will follow by questions, answers, and any discussions that we would like to raise. The floor is yours, Meral. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. I don't have a very stable internet connection, so I hope we will manage to stay with you during this panel. So I was asked to give a short introduction into the history of the Kurdish women's movement, and that's a very complicated issue in 15-20 minutes. So because of this, because the Kurdish women's movement itself has a very long, maybe not very long history, but a lot of development within a short period of time. And in order to give an introduction, maybe 15 to 20 minutes would not be enough. But for this time, I want to share some information with you on the history of the women's movement, or let's say important issue also regarding or related to the current protests and the slogan Jin Jiyan Azadi, what means woman, life, freedom, the significance or the meaning of this slogan also, and I will try in a way to connect it to the history of the Kurdish women's movement. So the Kurdish women's movement, or we call it more Kurdistan Women's Liberation Movement, which organizes itself within, let's say, the Kurdish freedom movement by the PKK, by the Kurdistan Workers' Party, was established inside the struggle. So the PKK was founded in 1978. We had 3 female attendees of the Foundation Congress of the PKK, but we had no autonomous women's organization just at the beginning of the movement. That developed later, especially at the end of the 80s, when the YJWK was founded in Germany. That's the Union of the Patriotic Women of Kurdistan. So that was the first separate women's organization inside, let's say, the modern revolutionary Kurdish struggle. And what you can also understand from the name of the organization was that it was not so much about putting women's related issues on the agenda of the movement, but it was more this very classical approach of organizing women for the national liberation struggle. And that's the reason why it was called also Union of Patriotic Women from Kurdistan. So it was more about the connection of women to their country, to their land, to their soil, and to their national identity. But at the beginning of the 90s, this situation changed. And it had some reasons, or let's say some factors that played an important role and led to a more separate organization of the women inside the struggle of the militants. One issue was the increased participation of women in the militant struggle. at the beginning of the 90s, because that was the time of popular uprisings. And these uprisings were also led by women, not so much in numbers, but more the quality of women in participating in these uprisings in places like Cizre, like Nusaybin in northern Kurdistan, and the Turkish part of Kurdistan. They were leading them, the way they were able to mobilize the people and give strength to them and courage to them. That played a very important role and created a kind of female leadership also during these uprisings. Then the increased oppression of the state as answer to these uprisings, and as a result, the destruction of thousands of Kurdish villages, mass imprisonments, torture, extra-legal killings, etc. All this led to an increased participation of women in the struggle. At the same time, not just because of, let's say, issues regarding national liberation, but a lot of women that did not want to live a classical lifestyle according to, let's say, feudalist or sexist role models, patriarchal role models, that many women joined the guerrilla struggle to escape forced marriage, for example, or oppression, patriarchal oppression inside the family also. So that was also a very important reason for women joining the struggle. But just when suddenly the number of women in the mountains within the guerrilla ranks increased so much, this created also a lot of conflicts inside the movement. And I think this is an important dynamic also, if we look at the evolution of the Kurdish women's liberation movement, because, for example, there were the gender conflict was radicalized in a way through the increased participation of women. But on the other side, we had also strong class contradictions between the women, because the women had different backgrounds. We had a lot of women that were joining the guerrilla from the villages inside Kurdistan, that were maybe not able to go to school. Many of them were analphabets, so had more a kind of peasant background. And then we had a lot of women that joined the guerrilla from the universities, who had a more intellectual background, who had maybe more ideological reasons to join the movement, and maybe had more kind of middle class approach or attitude in her character. So this created also, this sprang a new dynamic also within the woman. So, and if you don't handle these contradictions in a productive way in order to further develop the struggle ideologically, organizationally, militarily, politically, etc., then it can be very destructive at the same time. Because, for example, even if you have people that claim to be revolutionaries, that claim to be militants, that want to create a free life, they still are mostly influenced by the ruling system. That means, for example, that means especially the patriarchal mindset. So you had a lot of male revolutionaries that tried to continue traditional role models inside the revolutionary or militant movement. And we had a lot of women also that were not really conscious about the gender conflict or sexism or how these models are constructed, and were happy to continue their traditional relationship with men inside the revolutionary ranks. So in this sense, I would say that the decision to build a women's army inside the guerrilla, the decision to organize women separately with an own organization, with own headquarters, with own decision-making processes, with own academies, etc., which is a process that started in 92 and was finalized in 95 with the first Women's Congress in the mountains of Kurdistan. I would say that this was also a result of the internal conflicts that happened. that were created by the increased participation of the women inside this movement. And it was especially Abdullah Ocalan's approach to difficulties that played an important role, because his approach was always to make difficulties or conflicts or contradictions the ground for new development, and not, let's say, not handle difficulties as a burden, as something that takes you back, to try to make them productive at the same time. So this was his approach especially. And actually what also played an important role was during that time in 91, supported by NATO forces, Turkey started big military operations in Iraqi Kurdistan, also with the support of the KDP. And so we had an intensification of the war, and women again were playing a very important role in the resistance against the Turkish army, against the military offensives. And these, for example, one of them is Gülnaz Karataş, nom de guerre Beritan, who was a commander that joined the guerrilla from the university and who was very courageous also in the gender struggle and in the class struggle inside the PKK, and she documented this in her diary, which was published later also. So this kind of woman played a very important role during the 90s. And also, I mean, she's just one example in the guerrilla, but there have been also some other very important women like Ronahi and Berivan, who in Germany burned their bodies in protest to the criminalization policy of the German state. Or let's say, for example, Zilan Zeynep Kınacı, who bombed herself in a military parade in Dersim in 96, and many other women. So I would say that during the 90s, it was a very dialectical process, so nourished from a lot of different focuses or places of the movement, which were able to develop the women's movement further. And as I mentioned, this resulted in 95 in the foundation of the Union of Free Women of Kurdistan, YASK, which was the first really separate organization of Kurdish women inside the revolutionary movement. Later, one issue we often mention is, and I think that's very important, we have to underline it. In 98, Abdullah Ocalan, in his message to the women's movement on occasion of International Women's Day, he made an important statement that said, the way the 19th century has been the century of bourgeois parties, and the 20th century has been the century of workers' parties, the 21st century will become the century of parties that put women's liberation in its center. And if we look at the developments today, if we look at what kind of big dynamic women's liberation struggle today builds within the social struggles, we see that he was right. So maybe he was saying it will become the century or the age of parties of revolutionary parties that put women's liberation in its center. But what he said, or what we can understand from that point, is that he was thinking the 21st century as age of women's revolution. So from that point, the women's movement inside the PKK and also within, let's say, the legal sphere of the struggle in the different parts of Kurdistan and also within the diaspora, the organizational form changed according to, one, the needings, and on the other side, or the conditions, and the aim, the objectives of the movement, because this is also very important. The form of the organization has to be in balance with your aim, with your objective, So that was the reason why in 1999, within the women's movement, the first women's ideological party was founded. And the aim was to deepen the ideological struggle. On one side, within the women's movement, to deepen really the consciousness of enslavement of women, the roots of enslavement of women or the roots of patriarchy, and on the other side, due to it, women's liberation, to deepen this process of women's liberation ideologically, politically, practically, etc. And from there, what happened, because we don't have much time, so I don't want to get too much in detail, but what happened is, and I think this is the significance of the Kurdish women's movement, it started maybe with a small group of women. And from the 90s, they started to build organizations, and they often changed the form. And they reached an organizational level where they are totally autonomous. And I think that's a very important issue, the issue of autonomy. Because nowadays, the Kurdish women's movement is organized not just separately as women, but autonomously. And because she's organized autonomous, or let's say the autonomous organization of the women's movement has two main pillars. On one side, you organize the woman, you deepen the consciousness, you produce ideology, you continuously produce women's liberation ideology, and which is today mostly expressed by jinology. But at the other side, you as an autonomously organized force get inside all mixed structures and try to fulfill all these structures with a mentality of freedom. That's the role. And because of this, I think it's very important to underline that the co-chair system, for example, which is the result of the autonomous organization of the women's movement, or the principle of equal participation and representation of women in all spheres, in all levels of the struggle, because it's not just the co-chair system. You know, you have this equal participation and representation everywhere. And all women are nominated by the women's movement itself. So that means they are the expression of the collectively organized will of the women's movement. This is a different quality. It's not just about numbers. If it was just about numbers, then maybe the German Green Party would really be able to develop feminist foreign policy, you know, but it's really not just about numbers, it's about the quality. And all women that are co-chairs or that participate in mixed structures have the job or have the responsibility not to participate individually. For example, me as Meral, that I go there and share power position with a man. No, what we try to is through going inside these mechanisms, trying to challenge and overcome power by representing the paradigm of freedom there, fulfilling everywhere with the mentality of freedom. For this, I first need to overcome it. I first need to overcome power in my mindset. I first have to overcome it in my approach. I have to deepen myself in women's liberation ideology in order to be able to play my role inside the revolutionary movement, because that's about, it's not just about liberating women. You liberate life through liberating women. So because of this, the women that are part in the militant movement have a very hard burden, a double burden, because they always struggle twice. One in the autonomous, let's say, structures, but on the other side, at the same time inside the mixed structures. And I think this is one issue which is maybe not reflected enough, but this is what makes it so functional at the same time, because otherwise you would reproduce power relations, you would reproduce the patriarchal order when you share power with a man. But what we try is to really to abolish all kind of power relations based on the paradigm of democracy, ecology, and women's liberation. And in order to do this, I think three issues are very important, or the connection between them. In Turkish, it would be something like the three Ö. It's you know, the O with the 2 points on it. It's in Turkish, it would be özgürlük, örgütlülük, özgünlük. Pardon me. Özgürlük, örgütlülük, özerklik. So that means autonomy, being organized, and freedom or liberation. And these three issues, the issue of liberation, of freedom, the issue of being organized and autonomy for women, they are so deeply connected to each other. And they are, I would say, the main dynamic for, let's say, the women's revolutionary process. They built the base of it. And Jin Jiyan Azadi is something like the expression of this, let's say, dialectical connections. And I think today we have a lot of women's groups, we have a lot of women's organizations, movements, and we have also a lot of women that are organized inside mixed structures. But I think what we really need to deepen on is the importance of autonomy, of organizing yourself in a very autonomous way in order to play a revolutionary role within the mixed structures, or the common struggle, which is for a revolution. And that's also why we say that real revolutions or true revolutions must be women's revolutions in order to be a revolution, in order to change the social order, in order to build a really a radically democratic new model. And this is a lesson, the history of organized women's struggles at the same time. This is a lesson of the revolutionary movements of the last 2 centuries, because we see that the women's issue, or let's say the question of women's liberation, was always seen as a secondary issue that would be solved automatically in a moment after the revolution, as if there is something like after the revolution, because it's not a moment in history, it's a process which always continues. And when the PKK started its struggle, when they formulated their program, they had the same approach. They were deeply influenced by Marxist-Leninist ideology. And they were reading Alexandra Kollontai and other, let's say, Leninist, Marxist female cadres, also Rosa Luxemburg, Clara Zetkin, in their diaries, their books, their texts. They were really deeply influenced by them. But this is one issue which came out as a main lesson from the practice or experiences of revolutionary movements in the 19th and 20th century, that one of their main mistakes was to handle women's the gender question, or which is the core of the question of freedom, as a secondary question, and not putting it inside the center of everything. The way the women's movement is organizing itself as a form is answering to the needs and also to her approach or to her objectives, which is really to turn the 21st century into an age of women's revolutions, not just in Kurdistan, but all around the world. And if we look, just to come to an end, if we look at the situation worldwide, today in Iran, in Afghanistan, also in places like Latin America, Asia, also I would say North America also, and there are many, many different examples we can give. The way women are embracing female struggle, and the way that, or for example, if we look at this year's and last year's manifestations, protest actions on the occasion of International Women's Day or November 25, that more and more women also were carrying pancards, writing, we need a revolution. The revolution is feminist, female revolution. We call it women's revolution. So you see that the notion or the consciousness about the significance of our history, of our age, of our time, for realizing social liberation through a women's revolution is spreading. And I think this shows us that we've been very right, but we need to deepen our struggle and find ways of coordinate better in order to really change history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meral. Great talk. And maybe it's now a good time to mention Gülten Kışanak's book. I remembered when you were talking about it, because isn't it a great book that explains like how it was actually not a bottom, like the top-down process, but women themselves were creating that new process within the movement, right? So maybe, the purple color of Kurdish politics, I believe the translation.
Yes.
That's a great book that all of us should read again and again, maybe. With that, actually, we had a great chronology of the feminist movement and women's movement in the Kurdish politics. And now we will maybe talk more about ecofeminism, moving on from Meral's presentation with Sonia. Sonia?
Okay, thank you.
Right, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Right, so my name is Sonia Karimi. I am a representative for Kajar, the community of free women in Rojhelat. Today, we're going to be exploring ecofeminism. Now, the theory of ecofeminism has many branches, and today we're going to consider two and how they apply in Rojhelat, Eastern Kurdistan. One is a branch which considers the idea that there is a link between male-centric power and the domination of women and nature. The other is that there is also a branch where they explore global warming, ecological and environmental problems, and how they will profoundly affect women more than men. One theorist that I looked at was Carrie Weil. She locates the exploitation of women and animals in mutually reinforcing systems and practices of unjustified domination, particularly sexism and speciesism. She also suggests there is a capacity for detached reasoning, where one asserts and dominates by suggesting the subject is incapacitated, non-sentient, or just simply not of the same ilk. Exploring the Iranian regime's laws and conduct, certainly one can see the foundation of their power is constructed on the idea that they are vessels for the will of God, a superior prime mover that has chosen to impart his wisdom on the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah means the sign of God amongst mankind, cementing this idea by renaming Iran the Islamic Republic of Iran. On the 7th of March, 1 month after the Iranian Revolution brought the Ayatollah to power, a law was created which prohibited women from being in a public space with a naked head, that is, to use their direct translation. This headscarf became a physical reminder of the presence and authority of the regime on the female body, particularly the head, and by proxy, the mind. Similarly, the Sharia constitution argues that the woman is only worth half of a man, and this is reflected in their courts as witnesses in laws governing inheritance, etc. In one circumstance, we saw a lady, Miss Haydari, in Ahwaz. She was decapitated by her husband. The courts decided this was a marital issue and not an issue for the courts. Therefore, he was let off. Simultaneously, if we can compare it, animals are not considered sentient, and there are no laws which prohibit animal cruelty. Similar sentiments are seen towards these women. These can be considered as examples of the Iranian regime disregarding both women and other animals, but it is also an example of how the male is superior while everything else is object. In essence, this is extreme patriarchy. As Iran and Rojhelat's environment degrades and its resources are depleted, the space becomes uninhabitable and the wildfires have erupted across the vast expanse of the Zagros mountain range. Simultaneously, as the laws governing women, their rights, freedoms, and existence are tightened, we can see they have become united together in protest. These protests erupting across Iran are significant because they are a direct response to the patriarchal governing system in Iran, the monopolization of the land, resources, and the use of women as chattel. For 43 years, they have faced femicide and have had to submit to a role solely within the private sphere. And their fertility has been used for men to assert dominance and obtain positions of power. For example, where a man has a son, they can be considered to take over a father's role, i.e. Khamenei's son, Mujtaba, who wishes to take over his father's position as Ayatollah. Now, colliding with this is the colonization of eastern Kurdistan, Rojhelat, where the women are not only oppressed because they are women, but also because they are Kurdish. The women there have been subjected to decades of war, genocide, and femicide, and have also participated in the fight for liberation of Kurdistan. And many of the youth have fought under the banner of PIK and PKK. Now, as the youth of Rojhelat have fought across the other parts of Kurdistan underneath PIK and PKK, they have been exposed to the theories of democratic confederalism, of genealogy, and as a result, so too have their family members. Therefore, as Jin Amini was arrested in Tehran, the people in Iran considered her an Iranian woman, and she became symbolic for the Iranian women of that oppression, of that femicide which they have faced. But for the Kurdish women, she was something more. She symbolized not only the oppression of women, but also the oppression of Kurdistan in general. Many people have argued that Jina was arrested because she was a woman, but she was killed because she was a Kurdish woman. This collision of cultures meant that the Iranians then became more aware as the protests went on of the slogan Jin Jiyan Azadi. Jin Jiyan Azadi translating as woman, life, freedom, and it quickly took hold. The women have gathered together, all of these women across Iran and Rojhelat under all of these ethnicities, Balochi, Faili, Arab, Yahudi, Baha'i, Kurd, and they've all decided that this is the slogan for their protest. Now, this is striking because despite the total control of the state media, the women have seen brief glimpses of the alternative, where Abdullah Ocalan argues that democratic confederalism is open towards other political groups and factions. It is flexible, multicultural, anti-monopolistic, and consensus-orientated. Ecology and feminism are central pillars. So it is striking that this has reached across the expanse of Iran and Rojhelat. One of the reasons why this is striking for the ecofeminism movement is because as women, they tend to suffer more under global warming and ecological and environmental damages. Due to the lack of independence in decision-making, power constraints women's ability to adapt to climate change. Women often have limited or no control over family finances and assets. In many communities, women are underrepresented in community politics and thus have little influence over their community strategies for adapting and over policies that support women's rights and priorities, particularly as resources become scarce. Right now, we're seeing a water crisis in Rojhelat and Iran. Therefore, a lack of water for women, particularly as they menstruate, particularly if they're giving birth, it exposes them to illnesses. The way we can look at this is as the environmental problem becomes more out of control, simultaneously on the other side, we can see the oppression of women becomes more tightened and they both start to become quite volatile. The women are protesting and the enormous wildfires across all of Kurdistan. We can see the connection here, and we can see that in a certain way, they're both trying to get their voices heard. Things are reaching a precipice where we cannot return from. And that is the end of my very short slide. Sorry about how quickly I spoke. I'm really rather quite ill, but I hope it was informative. Please do let me know if you have any further questions. Thank you very much.
I will feel better soon, Sonia. No, I think, yeah, it was a bit fast, but that was very clear, I think.
Thank you.
Maybe I can ask both of you to warm up. Like, could you talk a bit about the experience in Rojava, like women's villages, eco villages, and so on, and how you guys have been talking about the feminist movement, women's movement, and ecofeminism, and how that is actually being taken to practice in Rojava? How is, what was aimed, what has been able to be done, and what's the current condition with Turkey's invasions, etc.
I suppose just a brief thing would be to talk about, firstly, this water crisis that I mentioned isn't just happening in Rojhelat, it's also happening in Rojava, in Al-Hastaka. Through the Afrin canton, water has been restricted by Turkey. This has impacted women significantly. Their health, particularly as I mentioned, women menstruate, they need access to water. But what I noticed in my time in Rojava was how aware they are of the ecology and how how much they're trying to protect it and use the resources that are there. I did briefly visit Jinwar, but I think that Meral can better explain about Jinwar and about the ecological situation there.
Yes. So Jinwar, what means village of women, was a project by Kongresstar, by, let's say, the Confederalist umbrella organization of Kurdish women in Rojava. And the aim was to build a place of women for women and their children, which is based on ecology and freedom and democracy at the same time. So the women's movement was searching for a place first. They found a place, and then they started the process of building this village, and based on ecology, because that was very important for them, that Jinwar will become an ecological village. So that means that all the buildings, all the houses that you have in Jinwar are made by mul, or how we call it. I'm not sure about the English word for it. So kerpiç, I don't know what's in English. Maybe Pınar can help me.
Mud bricks. I call them mud bricks, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So, and they were produced collectively by the people there. Mm-hmm. And they have also gardens and fields, and but it was not just like, okay, bringing together some women trying to build an ecological village, but at the same time, many of the first residents of this village were victims of domestic violence, or let's say women that lost their husbands in war, and because of this had no base left. For example, there is one case of a family I want to share with you in order to make understandable why this village was so important for the women. So there was a woman who had, I think, 4 or 5 children, all girls. The smallest, I think, was a baby at that time. And her husband was member of the People's Protection Forces, and he was demining in Kobani. They were from Kobani, and Kobani is a city. I mean, all of you know about Kobani. What maybe not all of you know is about the social cultural background of the people from Kobani, which is mostly clan and tribal based. So that means a very feudalist social order at the same time. So, and when demining, this man, the husband of the woman, he lost his life. And the family of the man, they said to the woman, to their bride, from now on, you are not part of our family anymore, but we will get the children, we will get the girls, and you can go home to your family. And they really took all the girls, and they wanted to force them to marry. So, and that was just the time when Jinwar was going to start. And this woman, she went to the women's movement, she asked for help. And the women's movement was to bring back her girls, her daughters, and give one house in Jinwar to this woman so that she can live there together with her children, with her girls, until they maybe will be ready to move to another place. And I know this family, and if you look at the girls, you can see really the impact of growing up in such a place, because it's not just to fulfill your needs of life, because you learn a different culture of collective or communalist life in this village. I mean, first that you have so many women around you, to see the strength of women to grow up with these role models at the same time, to be able to produce everything you need for life by yourself. And also, I mean, you have houses for families, but you have also a lot of collective places, like, for example, the kitchen, like they had a council where they were taking collectively decisions about the village. For example, if they got a donation, they would come together and decide collectively what to do with the donation, if they have any meetings, things like that, So you have, on the other side, you have also democratic model, or let's say, they learn democracy at the same time. Also, they get out from the small family and become something bigger. And I think, therefore, the experience of Jinwar is very important, because it is what the paradigm expresses, what the paradigm stands for, because you have direct democracy, you have ecology, and you have women's liberation, and you are reorganizing life through this model. And therefore, I think that Jinwar was and still is a very significant experience and example, which is under threat, because it's not too far away from the front, from the places that are occupied by Turkey. And this is also a very big problem, because what the women's movement wants is to spread more, to create more Jinwars. But because of the threat by Turkey, it's difficult because you need a lot of time, you need a lot of money in order to make a village. And yes, but there is one thing I want to add when we talk about ecology and women also. And not just in Rojava, but in places of Kurdistan, and I would say in the whole Middle East, we have the situation. When I was a child, I was born in Germany, but I come from Malatya, which is the world capital of apricots. And each year in summer, we used went to our village in the vacations, and the whole big family met there at the same time. And what we did was to work on the field during our vacations, so we went there in summer, and it was just the farming time. And electricity came back. And by time, we got fewer. And nowadays, there are only, my family is not able to care for these trees anymore. So because on one side, due to political reasons, so many people had to move, had to leave their village. And when you leave your village, you leave your traditional production way at the same time behind you, and you go to the big cities and try to find a job in a factory or anything else, but you get disconnected from the nature at the same time. And due to urbanization, due to development problems in the Kurdish regions, due to ecological problems at the same time, because of, for example, sometimes you don't have enough rain, sometimes you have too much rain because of climate change, etc. So due to this, Kurdistan, which is very rich, actually, which has very rich soil, is not able to be sustainable for its people. For example, the last 2 years in Rojava, we have wheat crisis, because it's too dry and we don't have enough water resources. One reason is the water restriction from Turkey, that they just close it. The other one is the dam policy in the Middle East and Mesopotamia. We have everywhere dams, water dams, and they result in dry soil. They result in a lot of ecological problems, and they are seen as the main energy resource today, together with oil, which is also a big ecological problem, because in Rojava we are not able to produce oil in a sustainable or ecological way because we are under embargo. And they do not let us take the machines inside in order to produce in a more ecological way. So because of this, many people get cancer, also many women. During the last years, many old people in Java died because of illnesses. And I think that they are also connected with the air pollution, which is a result of this way of producing oil. What you need, because you are under embargo, you are under occupation. This is the only thing you can do to finance your democratic model. So I think that this is also very important to see how these issues are all connected to each other. And I would say that women are the biggest losers because, and you can see this, especially in Iraqi Kurdistan, because in Iraqi Kurdistan, an issue which is often not so much reflected in discussions or in the press, etc., is that in the 90s, more than 6,000 Kurdish villages had been destroyed by the Ba'ath regime under Saddam Hussein. And Iraqi Kurdistan, the population there used to be mostly farmers. Maybe 90% of the people were living in villages farming, And in the village, you see that let's say the relationship between man and woman is more free if you compare it to the life in the city. In the village, the woman is able to participate equally in the production process, maybe even more than the man, But due to oppression by the state, millions of people had to leave their villages and come to the cities. And in the cities, the women are not part of the production process. That means that if you're not a teacher or if you're not a middle-class woman, and the majority is not, you spend 24 hours of the day inside your house, serving to the man. And because of this, you don't have anything to say about the economy of the family. You don't have anything to say about politics. You are not able to get out. You are inside a cave, And this is the situation of hundreds of thousands of women in Iraqi Kurdistan today. And I would say that this is also a result of this forced migration, what disconnected them from, let's say, their rural life, where they were able to play an important role, and that now they are not anymore. And this leads to deepened sexism. This leads to a lot of domestic violence, discrimination of women, etc. So you can see that not just in Kurdistan, but I would say in the whole Middle East, that political conflicts, war, ecological crisis, production relations, and its influence on women and the society are so deeply connected to each other that it's very difficult to solve one of that point if you don't make a radical big change. That was a bit long, sorry, excuse me, but I think that were important points.
Yeah, really, and thank you for that. We have a question from, you raise your hand, but I can't see your name properly, I think, but you know yourself, so please go.
I'm Dana.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dana from Germany, so I'm a bit far away from the revolution in Iran, especially, or the women's movement. My question is especially to the modern times now. What happens in Iran, if I'm allowed to ask? Maybe Sonia first. So what I observed from very much outside, that during this woman movement in the revolution, as a big part or leading part of the revolution, men are kind of behind, let's say, their women. So men are behind or beside. I don't know how to define it, but that is the observation from Europe, from our point of view. So my question is now, and I'm asking as a woman, as a feminist, what do the women in this movement expect from men. This is a very, it's on the meta level, I know, but can you define exactly not what you expect from men in society, but what do you expect now in this time of women's movement and revolution? What can men do? How can they support it? Not to fight against their view on the whole thing, because they have their own thoughts in the revolution. And I know all the problems from Arab and Oriental countries, and Meral just pointed out. But I think it would be very to engage everything and to make the bigger and bigger and bigger revolution in Iran, especially. What I'm very excited to be here and to observe it and to talk to people. What do you expect from the men, not in their role of men, but how, let's say, even how to support women's movement from their point of view? This is really my main question, because compared to all other, I'm ready in a minute, compared to all other movements in Iran, especially, the men never have been behind women, but now it seems there are kind of. What is your impression? What happens?
Great, thank you. Sonia, maybe you can respond, and we have 4 more questions already, so maybe try to keep it short. And maybe
do you want to ask the other 4 questions as well, so that we can figure out?
No, let's go ahead and you can respond, but then we can collect the others one by one.
Okay. So in terms of Rojhelat, Eastern Kurdistan, which is underneath the Iranian regime at the moment, for quite a long time, we have been fighting for women's rights. Although we haven't quite succeeded to the extent that Rojava has, in terms of finding a theory that, not just a theory, but in practice, being able to support women and define women's roles in a society outside of a regime. So throughout the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s, Rojhelat was fighting a war, not just onto the Iraqi side where Saddam was invading through, but also with Iran itself. They were seeking their independence. Women joined the Peshmerga forces. They were trying to define their roles within that modern society that was being built around them. But no theory, no ideological support structure was really there that could help them understand. Something which Meral said was that these women that came from villages, these women that came from societies where the ideologies were patriarchal, were coming into these parties, and they weren't being taught a new theory. They weren't being taught a third way, a different perspective. So they were bringing those ideologies from the villages into these parties, and nothing really was changing for women in those parties. However, after the 90s, the women started to realize the fundamental problem was that education, was that perwerda that we call it. We needed to change that. We needed to find something that functionally worked. And a lot of the women, a lot of the youth at the time looked to PKK and found that democratic confederalism and genealogy had the potential. It really did. And men have predominantly supported us in Rojhelat. But when it comes down to it, because the laws don't support women, because the laws in Iran don't support women, where there is a man who wants to exert control, he is given that space to do so. So it doesn't matter whether they say they want freedom for women, they want equal rights for women. It matters in practice what they do. And that's what's important for the women in Rojhelat right now. It's not just about the men going into the protest saying they want that women freedom. They're saying Jin Jiyan Azadi because they don't just want the words, they don't just want the physical presence of them there. They want that specific ideology in practice in that space too. They have seen the success, they have seen the impact of how genealogy has shaped Rojava, and they believe that they too can use that in that space. Women no longer want to just be told that they're getting support from men. They want to see a physical representation of that support. And that, from what I'm hearing and from what I'm understanding from the women, it comes down to removing that regime completely, and replacing it. For the women in Rojhelat, we know what we want to replace it with. For the women in Iran, for the people in Iran, it's a bit more difficult because aside from Sultan Talebi, there aren't really influential parties in Iran. And that comes down to the fact that they've been oppressed for so long. Anything that is alternative to the regime is immediately quashed. It's immediately imprisoned or hanged. So I think right now, the most important thing is trying to support the women in Rojhelat, absolutely, but also trying to not leave behind the women in Iran, because if we don't find an alternative for them, if we don't find something that can replace that regime for Iran, then we run the risk of creating a chaotic space without a power structure in Iran. And what we've seen is where there is no power structure, where the chaos ensues, something extremist can come in, and there is that potential. There really is that potential. For example, we have the Taliban on one side. We have ISIS-K in Khorasan. So we need to consider not just fighting as Kurds and fighting as Kurdish women and asking the men for that support, but also supporting the women in Iran and finding an alternative and shaping that alternative space.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that answer, Sonia. We have Stefan. Stefan, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just unmute myself and put my take the video off as well. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. We were
Excellent.
seeing
Yeah.
you as well, but now we lost your video.
Oh, okay. Let's have another go.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That's on, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sonia and Meral, for your talks and responses so far. I'm taking a slightly different tack, although I think, Meral, you did start to talk about some of these issues. My question is around how some of the politics of women's liberation and ecology sort of play out in the sort of spaces of everyday life. A couple of particular contexts. I'd just be interested in, I suppose, more the context and the specifics of things that aren't always talked about, but I think they're quite, in a way, they're quite central. The first one is around education and the educational academies and the way that these issues are dealt with there and the way that they're being discussed. And linked to that, I'm also interested in food and food production as well. So, or maybe this is a bit niche, but I'm quite interested in the way that food is prepared and consumed. So is there communal cooking arrangements, and to what extent is gender division changing? Is it there? How does that play out in everyday life? So the first one is around education, and the second one is around sort of canteens and communal cooking and things like that. How is that organized? Mostly in Rojava, but other areas as well. So I'd be interested to know from either of you or anybody else who has any knowledge of these areas. I'll leave it at that.
Another great question, but let's try to make sure we keep the answers like 5 minutes, okay? So that we can get more questions. Meral, you want to go ahead?
Yes. Okay. So for education, I think that ecology is an important issue in the curriculum. And I think that's also very important because you have to start also maybe with the new generations to give this consciousness to children especially. But I would say that still we are at the very, very beginning. So we should see this every day we become crazy when it's about waste. People throw their waste on the streets still. So, and in northern Kurdistan and in Rojhelat, I would say that there is a stronger consciousness, but Rojava and southern Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, still people go picnicking and leave all their waste there. So, and there have been a lot of campaigns in order to change this also, etc. But we are still at the very, very beginning. So this I want to say. And about food and food production. So nowadays in Rojava especially, there are a lot of projects for agriculture, all female projects and also mixed projects in order to produce food and not to be dependent on food that comes from Turkey, from Iraq, and from inside Syria also. And there has been a lot of development within the last 10 years, but I would say that still it's not enough. And there are also some small factories, but I mean, you can see the change. For example, 10 years ago, you had no Kurdish produced products in the shops, you know, and you had everything from Turkey and so on, everything imported. But now you have a lot of things that are produced in Rojava themselves. So not just vegetables and fruits, but also some other issues like cheese, like jam, like oil, olives, things like that. So it's developing. This still big problems because you have to always take into consideration that the people here never were able to produce anything, you know, so you don't have the ground for it, you don't have the know-how often, and things like that. So it will take some time. Communal cooking arrangements in communal places, yes. But inside the houses, I'm not so sure how much it changed inside the nucleus families. So, for example, if you have academies, and you may know that there are hundreds of academies in Rojava, you know, where many people stay at night also at that places. So, and you have a list, you will have a list, and everybody would go in the kitchen and cook for the rural people there. But I haven't seen communal cooking arrangements in the daily life. I think it's still the small family, and within the small family, I think it's still mostly the woman that cooks. So this is one issue. I mean, to get inside the families and influence the families. But one small thing I want to add, one thing I heard about the academy of the PKK in the 90s in Damascus, where Ocalan banned women from cooking, because he was saying you have been cooking for 5,000 years. So in this place, women should not get inside the kitchen and cook for all the people. Men should do this. And in that place for years, only men, only the male militants were the ones to cook for the whole academy, for hundreds of people. But I think this is one issue we have to challenge more inside the revolutionary process also. Sexist role models are a big problem today also.
Thank you. We have Diana.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Diana Ramirez. I'm from Colombia. And right now I am researching regarding nature rights and also nature as a victim of conflict. And this presentation, Meral and Sonia, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Actually, for my research, I am observing how, like, how communities have a role on the restoration of ecosystems post-war, in a post-war phase. Here in Colombia, some years ago, in 2016, there was an agreement, a peace agreement with one of the long-standing guerrillas, the PARC, And one of the pillars actually is the transitional justice. And recently, that tribunal, this court, accredited the nature as victim of conflict. And it is very interesting. It is a scenario with many opportunities. We also have a new vice president, a woman from an Afro descendant, Francia Marquez, that she actually is an environmental activist. So this environment is very, it is full of opportunities to observe women's role in changing the reality. So my question is, in the studies that you've done on the Kurdish women's movement, is there like a collective knowledge production regarding this relation to their ecosystem? As you mentioned, it is very dry, there's water scarcity. So how does the knowledge production works in order for the relationship between community and the ecosystem builds up, and maybe kind of a political response to these women's and also nature struggles? Thank you.
Who wants to go?
Shall I maybe answer this question? So I think this is one of the strongest parts of the Kurdish movement, that there is continuously knowledge production in so many spheres of the life and the struggle. I think that there is maybe no movement that makes so much education and that has so many academies and sees education as a vital part of the struggle and of the life. So everything is about education, and you produce knowledge everywhere, especially collectively. For example, genealogy is one of the places where a lot of knowledge about ecology, about ecocide, about the relationship between woman and nature and women and ecology is happening in a very vital way, I would say. But not just. You have a lot of ecology committees, for example, and all committees, practice and education are disconnectable, are so connected to each other, you can't disconnect them. This is the way the struggle is happening. You always have a very strong component of discussion, of research, of analyzing, of producing knowledge, and due to this you make your practical work, and then the lessons that you take from your practical work show again inside the knowledge production. So I would say that you have a very strong and also communalist or collective way. You have this inside female structures, you have this inside mixed structures, you have this in structures of the militants, you have this in structures of ordinary people, you have this through the press, which is also a very important tool for not knowledge production maybe, but for reproduction also, and to reach the people. So because of this, I would say that this is a very strong issue. And also, I mean, during, because this is a process which is still continuing. For example, the Turkish state currently is cutting trees in places that are occupied by them. For example, Afrin, which is a city in Rojava and under occupation since more than four years. The trees, the olive trees of Afrin, are all cut down by Turkey and the jihadist forces. They are mercenaries, and they sell them. The same is happening now in Iraqi Kurdistan, in places where Turkey is doing its military operation, and which should be controlled by the Kurdish regional government of Iraq. And they are not stopping Turkey from cutting the trees and bringing them over the border to Turkey and sell them there, for example. Or, for example, all the bombing of this mountainous area where you don't have just fighters, but numerous civilian people that are doing agriculture, that are doing farming there. For example, the products that are produced by them, how can we be sure that they are not poisoned by all these bombs, by chemical things, and so on, and it gets inside our soil. And we drink that water, we eat these products, for example. So you were talking about post-war, but here we are still in this situation. So and these kind of attacks also nourish the collective knowledge production on these issues, because it's part of our life. It's a big problem for us.
Thank you.
I think we should have a whole another panel on this, only on this, about conflict and environment. It's a great answer, Meral. Thank you. We have Sarah.
Hi, thanks for all the discussion so far. And I wanted to actually follow up something about Genoa, and wondering how much the ideas and things that are developed there are actually used in other places as well. How much it gets into wider society, and particularly, well, I visited, it was not quite finished, and I'm actually an architect originally. I got absolutely fascinated by the construction and how really good it was, these traditional construction methods. But obviously in a lot of places, people will feel these are old-fashioned methods. It was quite distressing to see this beautiful thing happening in Genoa, but in other places that were being rebuilt, they were being rebuilt in concrete and steel, even though that steel had to be smuggled in. So it was really difficult. And even though, the people were telling us in Genoa that actually these mud houses were really comfortable and good in the climate. So I was, how much is Genoa, are those ideas affecting other things, affecting other places, and how much are you still sort of struggling against people's ideas that perhaps haven't changed? We still want that, people still wanting the concrete house, the whatever other symbols of modernity they were used to before.
Sonia, would you like to answer? Or
I mean, in terms of Rojava, I can't say much. I only spent 1 year there. I can say that for Rojhelat, there's the way the geographics of Rojhelat works, because it's so mountainous and because it's predominantly villages more than it is towns. No one really looks at metal structures and thinks that's what I want. In Hauraman, literally the houses are built into the mountains. In Miriwan, you just have small sort of bungalows that are similarly built out of mud or something. Only when you go into maybe about, I think out of 2,000 towns, we have about 900 modern ones. And they're predominantly like the big cities that tourists go to. Rojhelat is extremely ecologically conscious. It's also very communal, Rojhelat. There's a totally different mindset in its approach towards how society should be constructed. So in terms of how Genoa would affect Rojhelat, I suppose they'd be like, see, they've done it right. But I mean, I don't know how to respond to that in terms of Rojava. I'm not in charge of infrastructure in Rojava. I really wouldn't know.
Shall I maybe add some points? And this is, in my view, a very critical issue. On one side, the process of urbanization in Rojava itself is a problematic issue, I would say, because it just happened. There was no municipality that was able to plan the urbanization process. Suddenly people came and bought soil and just made their houses, and now you have Kamishlo, you have no place left, for example, and I think, and this was also a result of displacement and migration in the war process, because I mean, each occupation opened the way to displacement and migration. And the people tend to come to the bigger city, which were, for example, let's say the people from Afrin went to Aleppo. Or let's say the people here in Jazeera, they came to Kamishlo, and so on, or to Haseke. And especially in those cities that are under Turkish occupation, in masses they came. So you had to build houses for them. And also, I would say, one issue was the revolutionary process opened in a way, or I mean the new opportunities that were created by the revolution in Rojava were used or misused by some capitalists also, who took the chance, the opportunity to build houses, for example, because during the time of the regime, it was banned. They could not make, for example, these buildings, and now there was something like a vacuum, and some people that wanted to gain something, because so many people need housing, they were just doing this. I don't know how it's called, but for example, that the people come to you and you build the house and you give one apartment to each of them, and many people got very rich off during this work, and this happened here, outside the control of the autonomous administration. So I think that this is one of the negative side effects of the revolution, that we had this unplanned process of urbanization in so short time, and the outcome was often not very ecological.
I think if I may just add something, when I went to Rojava, I was struck by how unlike Kurdistan it was, in terms of its architecture, in terms of the environment, and I knew that the damage of Arabization was significant, the deforestation, the redirection of water through dams, but I didn't know how much, and it was so difficult to navigate myself around Rojava because I couldn't understand where the green spaces were. I couldn't understand. I knew it, but I couldn't visualize it until I saw it. The damage colonization has done across the expanse of Kurdistan is significant, in terms of the deforestation, which Meral mentioned, and the damage to the architecture. The damage to the architecture was done intentionally so that it could change the face of the Kurdish identity in terms of how their culture is applied. But that's just a short thing that I thought I should mention. Thank you.
We have Connor next.
Hi, thank you both, Meral and Sonia, for your presentations and the discussion. My question is directed to either of you or whoever wants to respond, and sort of picks up from a question that was asked earlier regarding men. So in my understanding, and please correct me, part of the Kurdish women's movement is about the meaning of being a woman in principle and practice, explored, for example, through genealogy, and the capacity for women to define that for themselves, facilitated, for example, by the autonomous organization, as Meral discussed. To me, it seems that asking the question of what it means to be a woman raises the question of what it means to be a man. For if the meaning of being a woman in society changes, so must the meaning of being a man. And here maybe the concept of free together life, or Hevjian Azad, if I understand that concept correctly, is a horizon or an aim. And there is the point from Ocalan in the movement of killing the dominant male, which to me calls for the necessity of the redefinition of what it means to be a man and raises this question. And I also understand there's many other issues here, like the question of multiplicity of gender, such as the LGBTQ question, and the contextual issue, like social conditions and gender relations being different in different contexts, like Kurdistan versus Europe, though patriarchy is part of the global civilizational system. But I was just wondering if you could comment on what you make of that issue. Thank you.
I do think just something small, if I can just say it. I think that, yes, it's true that we do need to redefine what it means to be a man in terms of male roles and female roles. Ocalan says that men need to stop considering women in terms of their sister, their mother, their wife, and rather just as a human being. Yes, of course, that means that we need to find a way to mediate that change in society. But that doesn't mean that women need to sacrifice more of their rights to placate that. Those need to be guaranteed. Those need to be ascertained rights in terms of how males consider their roles in society. It should just be in terms of as a human being towards a fellow human being. Everyone is sentient. Every breathing creature is sentient. We all think, feel, and we all want to be included. And changing that role for men and women in society requires it to begin from education. This isn't something that's going to happen in 10 years or 20 years. This is something that's going to have to take a century before real significant change is seen without having to be regulated. It's not going to happen overnight that a man is going to wake up and say, yes, I have been oppressing my fellow woman. It's going to take a grandchild to turn around to the grandfather and say, I can't believe what it was like back in your day. But that's just something small. I presume Meral will have something more to say on that.
Yeah, I would like to add that the question of freedom is not just a woman's question, So, I mean, the quest to liberate yourself. I think what is needed to strengthen and deepen really man's quest to liberation. And when you talk about killing the dominant male, it's about freeing yourself at the same time, no? And I mean, sometimes we are talking about terms. I'm not sure. But the women's movement had sometime a project they called transforming the man. So transforming and changing the man. They were not using the term liberating the man, but I would say that the question of freedom is a question of both genders, of man and of woman. So, and Abdullah Ocalan was talking about woman as a concentration of social relations and contradictions. And I would also, define man in this direction, or try to understand what a man is about in its social relations and contradictions, and not so much in biological issues, etc. So we have to understand man and woman in this really deep concentration of social relations and contradictions. And I would say that what we also, because there was another question, what we expect from man is not just support, because they are not in the position of supporters. I wouldn't name or define the relationship between man and woman in the struggle as one is the avant-garde and the others are supporters. No. But man can't be the main subjects in the process of liberation, or let's say of the women's revolution. This is historically based. So, but we are when we talk about the women's revolution, what is the place of the man inside the women's revolution? I think this is an important issue, and it should be also liberation of man in order to liberate themselves, clean themselves from all let's say, influences of the patriarchal mindset, you know, and that would mean that men also liberate themselves from patriarchy, from misogyny, from sexism, in order to be able to create Hevjiyana Azad, because that needs men also as subjects, you know, and not as supporters or as objects of that process. And I think that's one issue which is, we have to work further on, produce more knowledge, theorize this issue further. I was also as an answer to the way men were shouting and still are shouting Jin Jiyan Azadi, no, in the protest in Rojhelat and in Iran. I think this is in a situation that we have to analyze also and take some results from it and see what to do now with this situation, how to answer to it.
May I just say that I think it's also, I mean, I see your point, but it's also men have to strap themselves from their liberties, maybe not liberate themselves, but or like liberate themselves by strapping them from their extreme liberties and privileges. So there's like a dual understanding there, like what they're supposed to do in a way, maybe. But we have Nick as well, who wants to ask a question.
Those were wonderful talks, and thank you very, very much. I mean, really, really illuminating and thought-provoking. I've just got a couple of questions. I mean, they're sort of looking, sort of to contradictions that are maybe worth exploring. I mean, one is, I suppose, more to Meral than anyone else, because you raised the issue of the oil industry and the way that Rojava is sort of trapped, needing an income, but dependent on oil as one of the means of getting that income. And you highlighted how sanctions have made it very difficult to exploit the oil in a non-polluting way. I mean, I personally think it's almost impossible to make oil extraction non-polluting, but that's a broader question. The question I'd like to raise here is, you know, that the oil industry isn't problematic simply because of the pollution, in my view, and nor simply because of the climate impacts. I mean, the fossil fuel industry has been, there's a historic rule of fossil fuel systems in buttressing white patriarchal rule, and you cannot separate the continuation of white patriarchal rule from the fossil fuel industry. And I mean, I very much like to encourage people to read. There's a wonderful series of articles on what Kara Daggett, who's an American academic, calls petromasculinity. I'll put one of the links in the chat. But I mean, for me, the opposition to fossil fuels would be absolutely fundamental to any attempt to fight patriarchy. I mean, the two are utterly interlinked over the last 100 years. So that's one point. And of course, that raises a question about how might Rojava and the region more generally find other ways of funding the struggle and the inevitable need for reconstruction and rebuilding and so on, that doesn't involve reliance on incomes coming and revenues coming from oil and other extractive industries. And I think that's a really major issue. And it would be interesting. I mean, I'd like to propose that we perhaps in the future try and join with some other movements around the world that have faced this dilemma and sought other ways of generating such income, and indeed of creating what might be called banking systems, but which wouldn't be recognizable as banking systems to many in the West. in order to make credit available to people. So that's one question, and tied to that is, and I'm sorry to go on for so long, but just I'll be quick. Is what threat, in your view, does hopefully peace will come to Syria and the region at some point, but what threat does the peace process and what comes with the peace process pose to the revolution in Rojava? And I ask that question because given the position of seeking autonomy within Syria, any reconstruction funds, which will inevitably be in the offing come an end to the war, will be negotiated by Syria with institutions like the World Bank. They won't be negotiated by Rojava. They'll be negotiated by the central Syrian authorities. And the history of those reconstruction loans has been a history of the World Bank using small loans to begin with and then larger loans to impose a completely free market agenda on whatever they're reconstructing. So how would the Rojava revolution in those circumstances protect itself? Because that free market agenda that will be imposed will undermine much of what the revolution has been trying to achieve. So, I pose those two as longer term questions. I have no answers to them. I think that the one way forward is actually to reach out to movements that have been through that process of a peace settlement, including those in East Timor, those in Colombia with the FARC, those in South Africa post-apartheid, to see the challenges that that came up through the peace process and how the peace process actively undermined what they were trying to achieve. Sorry, that was very long.
That's okay. Meral, maybe you want to respond?
I totally agree, and I don't know what kind of answer to give to this question. Actually, the Syrian regime is refusing to get into negotiation process, peace process with the people here. But I know about the conditions, but I still think that it's important to develop an alternative approach outside, let's say, the paradigm of capitalist modernity when it's about negotiation processes and peace processes also. And the roadmap of Abdullah Ocalan, which he prepared during the time of the talks with the representatives of the Turkish state, in my understanding, represents also, let's say, a way or an example how peace processes can be led also outside those that we have. For example, even his demand of having a representative of the women's movement inside the negotiation delegation was, in my understanding, a very alternative attitude, that he said it's important that you organize the will of the women and represent it here, that it's not just about having women in the delegation, but really to the will and the view of the women. And I think that is important. But yes, and what you say is a very big dilemma, really. For example, the Caesar Act by the US harmed the people the most. And also, not the regime, but the people, and also the people in Rojava. Because the Syrian lira lost 10 times value. For example, I remember that maybe 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, 40,000 lira were $100, I think, and now it's 400,000 lira. And people have to pay now their rents with dollars, in Syria, in Rojava. So therefore, it's a very big dilemma, the influence or how capitalist modernity forces, structures, mechanisms, etc., are opposing themselves inside these places of revolutions and trying to create a counter-revolution according to their own interests. And we will see. What I don't want to make hypothesis because we are still very far away from that point, and we believe in our strength, and this will be another struggle, I would say.
And it is worrying that Erdogan already started saying, he's willing to talk to Assad and so on. So it's the geopolitics there is also crazy. Yeah, Stella, I have a question.
I just wanted to add to this. The most important thing would be precisely what we are trying to do here, to strengthen the movement by finding ways into the international movement to make clear what the Rojava revolution, what the Kurdish movement and is really about. Because we make the link not with major organizations, but precisely with those people who are part now of an international struggle against state, against forces that are coming in on the road everywhere. And there will be more. And it is to those forces, if they are now academics, if they are now trade unionists, if they are now activists, to carry that message, the importance of a united global alliance against states and their forces, how they are imposing it. That is precisely the task, because the movement of the Kurds is very strong. And after all, there are 40 million or more people, including in the diaspora. So that's one major advantage of the Kurds, which has to be used in all forms and ways. And they are all over the globe. In the majority, of course, in Europe, which is one aspect. So, I mean, there is two major things for me. In my experience, what I've learned over all these years until I'm now 81, is that we have to learn all these past struggles, mistakes, and see how we not separate the movement and look only at their aspects of development, but link that with the struggles worldwide. It doesn't matter. It's in Africa, if it's here, it is anywhere. We have, as I said, the small experiences. We have, people from all over the world, asking for precisely these issues. What is it really about? To go in, to give education to people, to say, this is really what's happening, and to do the trouble to publish things. Each and every one of you, to contribute to something which we can push out in the world, and not just, of course, as that, with ecologically other movements, no, with all parts of society who are affected by this very, very serious systemic crisis. And I really do think that is part of this very important issue of women and ecology, and because as you explained in the speeches and Sonia gave the report, it's all quite clear. It is a coincidence of that crisis international that brings now the whole Iranian crisis together with the international women's movement. It is here for us to see. It is here for us to take the opportunities. So it's not a question, I don't agree with Nick on this issue. It's not a question of, moving to one organization or this. No. It's addressing all layers of society. So, and I mean, I do think this is a start, this meeting. We will have, hopefully, Marco will produce a wonderful account of this meeting, maybe even with images and so on. And we will have a follow-up. And I appeal to you to make suggestions, to us after this meeting, of alternative ways of spreading the message. And that's why I even mentioned our friend, for Black Rose Books. Maybe we can think of a publication on this very issue. Women leading this, trying to spread the news about this in a much bigger way and develop this discussion. So I really want to make this appeal, okay? And I think Meryl and Sonia, you were excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Estella. Well, I also really enjoyed this a lot. I was really honored to chair it. But yeah, thank you so much and have a lovely evening. And thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.